The International Monetary Fund has instructed South Africa to implement reforms to boost private sector investments, promote good governance and improve the efficiency of public spending to shore up an economy hamstrung by rolling blackouts. Severe power outages, known locally as load shedding, coupled with softer commodity prices, mean Africa's most industrialized economy will probably only grow by 0.1% in 2023. The Washington-based lender said on Wednesday after a staff visit to South Africa. That compares with its January estimate of 1.2% and the National Treasury's projection of 0.9%. IMF said creating the conditions for higher economic growth and a reduction in South Africa's debt vulnerabilities will require stronger fiscal consolidation efforts, including plans to reduce the public sector wage bill and transfers to state companies while protecting well-targeted social spending and productive public investments. Also, reforms aimed at restoring energy security that attracts private sector participation in the electricity market and address Eskom's operational and financial challenges are part of what the IMF is asking South Africa to do so as to bolster output growth and create jobs. Now, the National Treasury said it is aware of most of these risks to economic growth flagged by the lender and is working on measures to address them. So this morning, joining me from Lusaka, Zambia, is Mtwalo Mnsoni, who is an economist and a researcher. Thank you so much, Mtwalo, for joining us. You may need to unmute your device so that I can hear you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back on the show.
All right, thank you too. Now, IMF has revised its economic growth for South Africa further downwards, saying that the possibility of growth will be pegged at 0.1%. Now, why is it that Africa's most industrialized economy is getting this negative review?
I think for the benefits of everyone who's following, I think it's important first to know what we mean by revising downwards the projection for economic growth. And economic growth is a measure of the total value of goods and services produced in a country in a period of 1 year, from 1 year to another. So revising downwards, this basically means that the country is set to produce less value of final goods and services compared to the last year. And mainly this is attributed to the fact that energy, electricity, fuel is a major driver for the production process of final goods and services. So the energy crisis that South Africa is hit by currently is a main driver for a slowdown in terms of economic growth being pegged at 0.1%. And for the ordinary citizen, it's important to know that this will automatically translate in less per capita income, less income given or made available to the individual to be able to spend on their day-to-day living, which makes the cost of living more expensive and also reinforces some of the economic and social challenges that are in South Africa, such as the high levels of unemployment that the country is currently grappling with.
All right, well, you mentioned the issue of power, energy crisis, as it were, and it's what so many people know about. Even the IMF has come out to say that power cuts, unemployment, and of course, low investments in critical areas of the South African economy are the bane for the downgrade, the forecast that it has come out with. But then would you blame the current administration for these frailties, or you will say it has always been a multi-pronged challenge that this administration has not been able to find solution to?
Well, the government does have a role of creating this enabling environment for investments. I think one of the factors that is considered by an investor is trying to look at the current business environment. Is there peace Is there security for my investments? And how does the long-term outlook look for the country? So if this environment is not created, I think it does not make the country an attractive place for investment. And we've seen projections on investment pointing that South Africa will see less of foreign direct investment coming in over the next decade. It's important to mention that the energy crisis, of course, presents some interesting prospects for would-be investors to invest in the sense that they would be able to provide the electricity provider with electricity and be able to make some money out of those purchase power agreements. But currently, I think there's a lot that needs to be done with regards to reforming and addressing challenges and allegations of corruption in the energy sector, corruption in different sectors, because this is what needs to be done for an investor to come in and see the investment as something that can yield the required rate of return.
All right, let's talk about the issue of corruption. IMF told South Africa to implement structural reforms to boost its economy and to bring about economic growth. And IMF specifically mentioned improvement in state-owned institutions, talking about bringing about some sort of improvements in the services they render to the public. But then we can start talking about Transnet, South African Airways, the South African Post Office, and Eskom, and some other government institutions. And of course, we understand the tales surrounding those government institutions. What particular word or set of words that tie the institutions together is the issue of corruption and financial mismanagement. So why is it that we have cases of rampant mismanagement of funds within these government establishments?
Well, first of all, even before we talk about why we have rampant mismanagement, I think it's important to mention that if the state continues bailing out state-owned enterprises, I think it's a huge drain on the financial resources that are available to finance social protection, infrastructure, education, and health. Bailing out state-owned enterprises that are not profitable, of course, would be directly affecting the citizens' access to good resources. And one of the issues that makes state-owned enterprises corrupt is the lack of adequate legislation to deal with incidences of corruption and the lack of implementation of legislation that might be there to do with such incidences. I think the allegation of state capture, the commission that was in charge for the allegation of state capture, came up with 8 judicial recommendations that needed to be implemented by South Africa. These were made public in October 2022. But of course, recommendations and working on recommendations are different things. The IMF also points out that this is one of the things that needs to be worked on to address the systematic corruption in South Africa. The Finance Action Task Force also came up with recommendations grey-listing South Africa, making people aware that South Africa is prone to aspects of money laundering and probably financing terrorism. There's a set of recommendations that are there. Some actions have been taken in terms of 2 acts of parliament to address this, which shows some political will, but then more has to be done to address systematic corruption. It's only when you address systematic corruption in SOEs, in your entire judicial process, that you can have efficiency of these institutions to be able to deliver on their mandate, and you'll be able to lift the burden from the use of public resources to bail out these. There's a bailout package, of course, for Eskom. If this can be used in a rational manner and in an effective manner, I think it will go a long way in creating that enabling environment for the private sector to invest into energy, and also go a long way in ensuring that some of the debt that has come from these SOEs is dismantled and there's more efficiency in delivering the energy that this institution is supposed to deliver in the first place.
All right, but then President Cyril Ramaphosa has been very vociferous and categorical about dealing with corruption. So So is it that the initiatives he has brought on board to tackle corruption headlong has not really trickled down to these departments and agencies and ministries? Or you would say that the issue about corruption is being dented because of the scandal surrounding his image or his person, as it were? Of course, I'm linking it to when you mentioned about the Palo Palo farm gates. Do you think that is a major dent on his fight against corruption in the country?
That's the thing. So there's one thing with having recommendations, speaking out on corruption, and there's another thing with doing actual prosecution to address corruption challenges. So you don't need only to address the after effects of corruption. I think there's more need to have a proactive approach, set up systems that will ensure that things are done in a more transparent and open manner. I think one of the headlines that we've had from the business edge today has been the aspects of purchase power agreements in Ghana. And one of the things that's leading to that is a lack of transparency. The same stretches across even Southern Africa. In Zambia, 12 purchasing power agreements, no transparency with regards to price. The same case for ESCOM. We're looking for private sector involvement in the energy sector, but to what extent is the legislative framework ensuring that there's transparency in terms of any purchasing power agreement that would be signed and would be negotiated, bearing in mind that this has got a direct bearing on our cost of electricity. So we talk about one of the things that has led to state-owned enterprises being in debt, being the fact that they haven't been supplying at the actual market price or where they can make a markup for their supply, and the same stands for electricity. So if we can have transparency in some of these purchase power agreements and it is known what the take price is, I think it can go a long way in ensuring that these deals are negotiated at a beneficial rate and we don't see escalating increases in the price and the cost of power.
Well, that might not be escalation in terms of price and power, but there's an escalation in terms of civil unrest in the country. You would agree with me.
Yeah.
The issue of national shutdown, as championed by the economic freedom fighters, is a major challenge in South Africa now. And one of their concerns, or part of their concerns, has to do with unemployment, the issue of power crisis, poverty that has prevailed in the country, despite the potential that South Africa has. But then, what do you think will be the likely play out in the coming days? Because, of course, this civil unrest and protest is part of what has resulted in the negative remarks that South Africa has gotten of late from the IMF and other international bodies. So what do you think what are your predictions, and what do you think the likely play out will be with this upheaval?
Well, for starters, I think the civil unrest comes out because you look at your economic and social outlook and it's not giving you a very promising picture. You go look for a job and there are just no jobs available. So it basically goes down to the ability of the country to address some of the recommendations that are also listed in the recent IMF outing, with addressing aspects of corruption, with addressing the aspects to do with unemployment, which is inclusive of vocational training, looking at probably creating a more efficient system for hiring, and probably looking at how we can grow the economy in very strategic areas. Of course, there has been quite an increase in the uptake of unemployed people into employment because of the rebound of the service sector in the last quarter of 2022, but during this very period, we saw a decline in terms of economic growth, a recession actually to negative 1.3. So if the economy is not growing, we don't have increased opportunities for people. I think we'll see an increase in this civic unrest, and it goes down to dealing with the basic fundamentals for a growing an economy. And if we can grow an economy, I think it will be able to create jobs for people and reduce on this civic unrest. The recession, the decline in growth to 0.1 that's predicted, translates into less per capita income, and this obviously puts the country at more risk of this civic unrest because people will just not have the income to be able to afford their day-to-day lives, and there'll be less likelihood that new jobs will be created when we see an economic growth of 0.1%.
Well, in the light of your submission, Mtwalo, EFF has said that Cyril Ramaphosa should step down, blaming him for the economic woes in the country. Do you think that he should resign?
Well, I don't give a political opinion, but basically what I think is there's much more that needs to be done, and most of this needs to be done, especially for the internal environment, by the government of South Africa. And I think this is why you are hearing this calls for resignation, because some of these are basic steps that have already been put down in recommendations that just need to be taken up by an aggressive approach by the arms of government. And of course, those instructions come from the leader of the government, the president. So I'm not giving you a position, but I do emphasize that there is need for the government to take a proactive approach and ensure that some of these bottlenecks to development, some of these bottlenecks to economic growth are addressed with. Some of them are quite, I shouldn't say basic, but are quite simple to address over a short term. For example, the IMF talks about the logistical sector not being quite efficient, and this has to do with the transportation of different goods and services. We've seen a decline during this very quarter in terms of the demand of goods and services that are produced by South Africa, and the projection of a 0.1 growth basically also hinges upon the reduction in the demand of some of the goods and services produced within South Africa. The biggest bottleneck has been the efficiency in terms of the supply. This can easily be dealt with. So these are some of the things that can be dealt with, and we can simply see these by just seeing political will and some dedicated statutory instruments and directives to deal with some of these bottlenecks.
All right, talking about bottlenecks or impediments to development, some economists are saying that the temporary welfare package or social package to the vulnerable in South Africa that carried on during the course of the COVID-19 era up to this point should be stopped because it's bringing about some sort of deficit in terms of debt servicing of the budget, and that deficit is pegged around 6.5% of GDP, and it's somehow affecting government spendings and its purse. So should the government cut down on these welfare packages and focus on debt servicing to reduce its financial burden?
Not at all. So the aspect of social protection spending, if done in the correct way, no corruption, and targeted at the most vulnerable people, I think it creates a platform and room for people to be able to sustain their day-to-day lives, and also creates a platform and room for people to be able to contribute to the much needed economic growth. If the country takes an extreme capitalist route, cuts down on social protection spending, just spends on paying back its debts, spends on paying back on infrastructure, then it's basically leading people into deeper forms of poverty because there are just no opportunities out there for them to be able to earn a living, earn some money, and be able to eat. So you can imagine that people who are currently on this package, if we talk about them being removed on this package because it's believed it's not efficient, it's a drain on the treasury, where would they get the jobs to be able to feed their families and feed themselves? Social protection is quite important and is quite a major contributor to economic growth as well, with the increased productivity of the citizens that are on this particular package. Very important tool for addressing poverty as well, and I believe that it does not make economic sense to do away with this particular package.
All right, before I let you go, the IMF also recommended that South Africa should actually broaden its tax base so as to bring in more revenue from that particular sector to government coffers. And also it said that it should strengthen the fiscal framework by introducing a debt ceiling. So how visible do you think this will be, and what steps rather do you think South African government should take in achieving this?
Firstly, I'll start with the last part. I think it's a known fact that if sovereign debt is not made transparent, is not negotiated in the transparent manner, it usually ends up being a burden on the country and ends up leading to negative outturns that just lead to the debt not being used in a more productive way and makes it very difficult to pay back. So yes, debt should be negotiated in a transparent manner. Parliament needs to have a say. This process needs to be done in a way that citizens have a say on the debt that is being contracted by a particular country. In terms of the broader picture, I think there is need to call for more efficiency, public participation, and more transparency in how things are to be done if South Africa is to realize probably bigger projections of economic growth over the midterm.
All right, finally, which sectors of the economy do you think South Africa needs to invest more or focus more in terms of implementation of these reforms that IMF is talking about to bring about some sort of growth in its economy?
Definitely the energy sector. So the energy sector needs to deal with dismantling the debt that Eskom has and making it a more efficient institution, creating an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to invest. And this also needs to be hinged by transparency and good deals that have been signed with private power producers. There is talk about the South Africa Energy Transition Plan. The energy crisis also presents an opportunity for South Africa to implement its current energy transition plan. Reforms in the unemployment sector are very necessary for continued growth and for continued sustainability of the social and economic environment that we've known South Africa for over the years. So I think these are the particular sectors that need to be paid attention to at this particular period.
And you will permit me to also include the tourism sector because that particular area has been a money spinner for South Africa in a very long while. Though there are challenges associated with the issue of security and all that, but if they can bring about some sort of reform in that sector, of course, there could be job employment, generation for citizens in that area too. All right, let's just...
Definitely agree with you. Of course, the tourism sector has also seen a rebound. But this has not been, we haven't yet reached the levels of employment and economic growth contribution prior to the COVID period. So this is also something that needs to be looked at.
All right. Thank you so much, Mtwalo, for joining this conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.